Hello and welcome to the penultimate episode in our series of bonus podcasts, Investments Unwrapped, brought to you by MoneyWeek and the Platinum Card from American Express, a card that offers over 30 travel and lifestyle benefits. In this series, we've been looking not at the week gone by, but the years ahead, exploring the world of alternative investments. We've met passionate collectors of rare books, fine wine and antique furniture, but today we're steering in a different direction, classic cars. How might a new set of wheels give your driving and your bank balance some extra horsepower? Poop poop, I'm Olly Mann, and this is Investments Unwrapped. And fueling our investment road trip once again, who else but MoneyWeek's executive editor, Chitty John Stepek. Welcome, John.
Nice to see you too, Olly.
I've got to ask, what are the Stepek wheels?
I hate to admit it, at the moment we've got a Nissan Duke.
Nice.
Which is not... I can see
Our guest is already shaking his head on the conference call.
Brilliant.
I think they're, attractive. Economical. What colour is it, John? That's what we all want to know.
Silver.
Uh-huh.
Boring silver.
Have you ever splashed the cash on some wheels?
I hate to admit
with here?
I'm starting to realise I'm a man of very simple tastes. Having done a number of these podcasts, I'm just not interested in cars at all. I can't wait till they drive themselves. I feel like a complete heathen.
Okay, well, the reference to self-driving cars at least glimpses into the futurology that we'll be touching upon, but I'm pleased to say that we're also joined by an actual enthusiast, for those of you who've downloaded this show, because it's about cars. It is Ashley Winston from Palmdale Motors. Hello, Ashley.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. Now, unlike John, you are a self-certified car nut, aren't you?
I'm the opposite. All my cash goes on cars, always has done, and hopefully always will do.
Yeah, when you say always has done, I've seen a Peter Stringfellow-like statistic claiming that you owned 150 cars before you even joined your current business. Is that true?
Yeah, and I think currently I've owned personally about 170 now.
Wow. Where did the passion come from? Because with a lot of the people we've interviewed on this show, it's been family, people being brought up with it. But I understand not from your parents, really.
No, not at all. Bless him, my dad wouldn't have known a good car if it would have run him over. I don't know. I generally don't know where it comes from. I remember playing with the kind of the corgi cars as a young age, and I love to know about the different makes and models. I had a good best friend growing up whose father was into cars, and I kind of got in that way, but it's a passion that's overtaken everything in my life pretty much, and I don't know where it originates from.
And are you really in deep, as in like the sound of the engine, the smell of the leather, the whole bit?
There's a limit. I'm not so much into how they work and the technical side of it. It's all kind of a bit like magic to me, and I probably spend a fortune on car mechanics. So I lack that, but absolutely, it's how they sound, how they look, how they feel, and I'm on what would be called a very open car lover. The cars I own are all very different, and they always have to be, from a classic American car to a fairly modern sports car.
What's your top drive?
I've got a 1964 Ford Mustang that I've had for 15 years, and I will never ever part with. But it's a terrible car, but I love it.
Is it adapted for British roads though, or is it the American left-hand drive?
Left-hand drive. Big gas-guzzling engine, wallowy suspension. It is appalling on UK roads, and I love it to bits.
Okay, good. Well, we've established where we are then. We've got kind of the odd couple of motoring here. The joy of fifth gear from Ashley and driving Miss Daisy from John. So hopefully we'll get some realistic conversation about values and investments. John, the market seems to be unstoppable at the top end, doesn't it, at the moment for classic cars? I've seen some astonishing statistics about how profit margins have risen exponentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's like most collectibles, classic cars have been doing well. And again, coming back to a lot of that is to do with the low interest rate environment we're in. And also the idea, people are concerned that inflation's going to take off. And when that happens, kind of trophy assets or real assets, as in stuff you can physically see and hold, tends to go up in value because people who have the money to buy them sort of put their money there rather than, sticking it under the mattress or in cash, because these assets do tend to keep their value as inflation goes up. I mean, the risk tends to be that if interest rates go up as well, then that can sometimes hit the value of trophy assets. But there's good reasons for them to have shot up over the last 10 years. Although cars are interesting because I did notice when I was kind of looking at this for the podcast, the rate of growth did actually kind of moderate between about 2016 and over the last 5 years. And it's only recently it started to pick up again. And I also think the other thing you do have to remember, and it's key to remember this with collectibles, is that it's not like stocks and shares. You get these kind of indices that are quite well constructed, but they're more like house price indices. It'll tell you what overall the market is doing, but it's very hard to then necessarily extrapolate from that to an individual house or an individual car.
Yes. And you do see headlines, don't you, Ashley? Bonham's sold such and such an example of a 1960s Ferrari for this insane millions of pounds amount. But then you read the detail and you realise, they only made 200 of them, or that one was owned by David Bowie, or whatever the thing is. I mean, one example of a mark doesn't represent all of them, does it?
No, absolutely. And there are so many factors that can make a particular car especially valuable. There was a 2002 Nissan GTR which sold at auction earlier this year for £400,000. Whereas,
I hope for your Duke, John.
Not quite the same car, but and a normal one would be maybe 100 grand at the moment. And the reason this car is worth 4 times as many as many pounds is it's done 26 miles, and that's an example of a factor that makes a massive difference to value. As you said, who's owned it in the past? With Ferraris, classic Ferraris, if they have a good racing history. That increases their value hugely.
But actually, mileage is an interesting one, isn't it? Because high mileage doesn't have to put you off like it might when you were buying a second-hand car for your trips to the shops. Because if it's got the heritage, then of course it's going to have a high mileage. That's baked into the price, isn't it?
It is, but low mileage will still always carry a premium, and that's not necessarily a wise thing to do, because cars are made of mechanical components, thousands of them, and some of them will wear out over time. So all the rubber bits and pieces will wear out over time. A classic example is the Ferrari F40, which is my all-time favourite car. They have rubber fuel tanks, and every 10 years you have to replace those fuel tanks, whether you've done 1 mile or 100,000 miles, at a cost of about £10,000 to £12,000.
Wow.
So mileage does have an effect on the value, but it probably not as much as it should do.
Yeah, the preservation aspect is a cost that you should really think about when you're investing, isn't it, John? In a way that it probably isn't with art and antiques that we've covered before, because, they have to be restored every 100 years, but basically you can hang them on the wall and that's it. A car, I mean, if you want to keep it running, there's an enormous cost there.
Yeah, I mean, that is important because, as you say, I mean, if you're buying a piece of antique furniture, then the last thing you should be doing is messing about with it. Get a professional restorer to look at it by all means, but most of the time you just want it as seen. But the thing is, if you do want your classic car to kind of survive, there is going to be that element of having to, fix bits of it. And the problem then is that you're going to have to go to a specialist unless you really are a kind of project person, because they're going to need specialist parts. You're going to need to try and, I guess it's a bit like doing up a listed building. I don't know how good an analogy that is. I mean, Ashley will have a better idea than me, but it's that sense that, you have to be very careful about what you do, but at the same time, it does need this maintenance. You can't just let them kind of rust in a garage somewhere.
Yes, and I suppose in the same sort of way, finding original parts, Ashley, or at least, replica parts that are reputable is difficult too.
And a car with original parts is worth more than one with recommissioned parts in it, absolutely. And for a lot of cars, it's very difficult to find these parts. And that can make a massive difference to value as well. Maintaining them is just, it's an absolute minefield if you don't know what you're doing. And it's very easy to make a very small error and have that affect the value of your classic car hugely.
Okay, so what is it that you should be looking for then? If you do have some money put away and you are interested in investing in classic cars, where should you start? And don't just say follow your passion, because everyone said so far. I know that. So let's say I like Jaguars, then what?
Okay, so the first thing to do is set your budget. And cars are not like books or wine, where I know you can start an investment in a book for as little as £50. You can buy a really ropey classic car for £1,000 or £2,000, but in reality you need to be spending £5,000 to £50,000 to have it worth the investment. So that's the first thing. Looking at what the market's doing as far as trends is also very important. It's not always an easy thing to establish, because the one key factor that seems to affect the value of a classic car, whether it's going to rise or not, is that cool factor. And I see it a lot, being very passionate about cars. Something mundane will drive past me that I haven't seen on the road in 5 or 10 years, and I'll suddenly go, oh, that's cool. I wonder what they're worth now.
Like what?
Like I saw a very early Ford Sierra, fairly basic specification, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to drive around in a car that kind of looks a bit out there. And it starts with people like me who just want to be driving something that's a little bit different, because we get a kick out of that. But that's how it starts. And that's the first step of it then becoming kind of interested on the classic car market and things going up in value.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, John? Because I feel like people, when they hear the phrase classic cars, still think about cars from the 50s, 60s, 70s. But I was reading about a Peugeot 205 GTI now being a classic car. My dad had one of those in the 80s. I used to sit in the back of it, a convertible, and it used to bash my temples against the side of the roof when it was down, because it was so poorly designed in my view. But obviously people love them because they're so 80s, basically, in a way that didn't feel at the time like that was ever going to be cool.
Well, there's always that element of these nostalgia things. It's the kind of cars that you were either being driven around in, like you say, whenever you were a kid, or the ones that were maybe your first car. And there's a sense, because I've noticed that a lot of those kind of cars that I would have classed as boy racers are like massively popular. And I guess it's that sense of, I was 17 and I passed my test and I ripped this up in, the Sainsbury's car park or whatever. And it's that kind of, that kind of sense of going back to something that gave you joy when you were a kid. And definitely a lot of the guys I knew who were actually very into their cars drove those kind of wee boy racers with, the kind of the LE, or I mean, they can't have been LED systems, but the kind of the inboard, the kind of blue dash light stuff and all the rest of it, and massive exhaust. I mean, you can tell that I still didn't understand it even then. But yeah, no, definitely the nostalgia bug is huge, again, across the collectible space.
So then, should you be looking, Ashley, for cars that would be nostalgic to someone who's in their 30s or 40s in 20 years' time for an investment piece? Because the ones that are selling for big money now are basically the cars that 60-year-old men want, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. The big money stuff is the kind of 60s Ferraris, Aston Martins, things like that. They will always do very well. But if you look at the terms of volume of classic cars sold, the decade that sells that has more classic cars being sold than any other is actually the 90s. Because as you just said, it's people who remember these cars from when they were younger, like I do. They couldn't afford them at the time, or they're too young to drive them at the time, and now we wish to buy them. And the biggest section in my collection of cars is always 90s cars, because I'm in my mid-40s and I couldn't quite afford what I wanted to have at the time, and now I've got them. A big trend recently has also been for cars from the 2000s, exactly the same reason. And there are cars out now which will be, I could even, there are examples of cars that probably come out just now would likely to be classics in the future.
Such as?
I would probably, that's a good point. I actually think that a lot of the electric cars are going to be considered to be future classics, because some interesting things have been done. The one I'd pick would be the BMW i3. It's a quirky individual car. It has it's got all the markings of a future classic, aside from the fact that it's a fairly high volume car, which has an effect. But it's going to be a car that I think come 20 years time, when people are looking at the original electric cars, they're considered to be very cool.
But it's a first gen electric car. So, I mean, if you think about, I don't know, first generation Macintosh computers, they are rubbish now, aren't they? If you try and turn them on, I mean, they might look retro and cool. Isn't that a problem with electric cars in the future, that electric cars will get so much better that the ones from 30 years ago, as it will be then, just won't work properly?
But my IT guy is desperate to find an original Spectrum ZX81, because they're old and they're cool.
So you are kind of catering for geeks, aren't you? And it's interesting. I made the gender point, John, earlier. I said 6-year-old men, which I know is a stereotype, but it is largely, it seems, men who are car geeks. And also internationally as well, interestingly, compared to the other things we've been talking about, it doesn't seem to particularly affect the Chinese, this bug. Classic cars appear to be selling in Europe, Latin America, North America, Australasia, but not particularly China. Why is that?
I mean, I suppose that's probably partly because people who kind of collect classic cars actually do sometimes use them. So, you're not going to ship a car from the UK to China or Russia in the same way, that you might be doing something with art or, the other assets that have gone up. And also, I mean, to an extent, a lot of the money in the art world, particularly that's come from China and Russia and other areas, has often gone into heritage assets from that country. So the Chinese money is going into Chinese art, if you see what I mean. And I'm not sure how true that is for cars, which are sort of like traditionally the ones that we're thinking about are European, they're the classics, and also American. Whereas okay, I'm not a big fan of cars, but I'd be surprised if you lined up 10 people and got them to say, what's a famous Chinese car? If any of them would be able to tell you. Ashley's now going to tell us. But
it's very interesting because a lot of our clients are people who move from overseas to the UK, so I get to speak to lots of international people who buy normal cars rather than classic cars. And there's a thing in a lot of the world about an old car being a rubbish car. In a lot of the world, it's a cultural thing. The newer the car, the better it is. And the whole classic. So when I tell certain clients that I own a car from the 60s and I own a couple of cars from the 90s and I own one from the 80s, they just don't get it. They don't understand why I'd want to drive around in an old car. It's just not what happens. So that is the reason why Europe and America do very well for classic cars, but not necessarily a lot of the rest of the world.
And what about on the point of electric retrofitting of classic cars? Fossil fuels are on their way out. Is that going to have an impact on the value of the cars that you love?
I think it will. There's obviously shown to be a market for that. As far as investment goes, I think that's not the way to go, because the cost of converting a classic car to electric is so much that you won't see that investment back. That concerns me. But when you convert a classic car to electric, you lose so much of the character of the classic car. And I'm not. A lot of people are anti-electric cars. I own an electric car myself. I very much like it, but you don't get the smell, you don't get the noise, you don't get the unreliability. And it sounds strange to say that a car being unreliable makes it. I took my 1964 Mustang into the West End last week, and actually it is ULEZ free and it's congestion charge free as well, because it's over 40 years old, despite all the pollutants it puts out. And for the first time in a long while, it wouldn't start after we were done in town. I had to call out the AA. That's part of the fun of owning a classic car.
Okay, but in 40 years' time, you might not be able to get petrol for it. That you wouldn't be able to go to a gas station and get petrol. So it makes it even more niche, doesn't it? I mean, I suppose the question is, does that make it more attractive to classic car collectors that it becomes harder to run and more of a niche pursuit? Or does it make it unattractive as an investment because it's just going to be harder to actually use the things?
I think both factors are going to have a play on what happens. Because I think when something becomes rarer and more interesting, of course, the values go up. But right now, a lot of classic cars are actually what I'd call daily drivers. You can buy a classic car from the 90s or the 2000s. Most of my cars, I will commute to work in. They're very usable. And when they start to become not that usable, then of course the market segment does shrink. But there's a lot of work being done at the moment on synthetic fuels. And that, for me, I'm hoping going to be the saving grace of the classic car market, where you can actually make CO2 neutral fuels without having a massive impact on the environment.
Interesting. Okay, so John Ashley mentioned cars at a sort of relatively modest expense. But if you want something that does cost, I don't know, 400 grand, and there's no way you could possibly afford to buy it yourself, there are some interesting options out there now for investors, aren't there?
There are. I mean, there's been this craze for fractional ownership of all sorts of assets like this, and also things like there's a fairly well-known app in the US called Rally Road, on which you can buy everything from a share in a Lamborghini to a share in a rare kind of Magic the Gathering card, or or Pokemon cards, all that sort of stuff. And so they kind of, to go along with this kind of craze for collectibles. And again, the kind of financial conditions around the world, that's kind of led to this explosion of the ability to buy bits of things. So, there's one in Britain that's kind of recently launched called the Car Crowd. And, they're offering the opportunity where you can buy, a wee bit of a Ferrari, for example, or there's one on their website just now, I'm looking at a Ford Sierra Cosworth. So you can buy a share in that, and then the idea is that I think you can go and, you can look at it in certain circumstances. But really it's just, I don't know, being the ability to say that you own a little bit of a classic car.
But it's the same process really as buying a share in a limited company. It's just that the asset itself is deemed to be potentially more profitable in the future than a limited company?
I mean, I'm always reluctant to compare these things with shares, simply because, for a start, a trophy asset like a classic car is never going to pay you a dividend. So whenever you buy a share in a company, you're actually buying that because the company at some point is going to make more money itself. So you're actually buying a share, if you like, in a little machine that you hope will print more money in the future. And I think that's how you understand trophy assets versus productive companies. If you buy a share in, say, Marks and Spencer's, you're doing that because you think Marks and Spencer's is going to make more profit in the future. The difference with the cars and other collectibles is that you simply think that object is going to go up in value in the future because someone in the future is going to value it more than you do currently. So I think it's really important for people to understand that difference. And that is also why, I mean, I'm an awful old stick in the mud. I get it. But there's a big part of me that thinks that, well, on the one hand, it's good to open up investment to, to other people, and particularly to younger people who aren't necessarily as interested in it. But at the end of the day, a classic car is never going to be a core part of anyone's retirement portfolio. You can choose for it to be, but if you're looking to actually invest for the long term, then you need to own things like shares and bonds and possibly property. And then on top of that, add stuff. So I like the idea. I think it's fun, but it's not the way to approach your long-term investments.
And you never get to drive it, Ashley. I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? How do you feel as a car guy about buying a car that's either so valuable you wouldn't dare touch it, or you only own a share of it so you never get to go in it? I mean, does that just feel intrinsically wrong to you?
As a car guy, that absolutely, you chose the words exactly. It feels intrinsically wrong to me. It really does. But I completely understand that as an investment, when you drive it, you do devalue it. My best friend's landlord has a 1960s short wheelbase Ferrari that's got a lot of racing pedigree. A similar one sold at auction recently for, I think, somewhere between 15 and 20 million. And this guy drives it on the road. He's given my friends lifts in it. And he is my hero because he drives it around without a care that he's damaging the value because he just likes to use it. But if we're talking about investments, he is doing the wrong thing. But that does break my heart.
Very much not John's kind of hero. Finally, Ashley, I've been asking everyone on this series for their investment heaven and their investment hell. Can you tell us honestly what's an investment that you've made in a classic car that just went terribly wrong?
I can, and I'm going to pick an example that's kind of lower down the end of the market. Last year, I thought I'd get on the whole 2000s car trend, and I bought a early Audi TT. The first generation Audi TT is considered to be a great driver's car and a great classic.
Okay.
And I bought one that had been slightly modified, which actually helps the value. Great provenance, which is the key thing. I paid £4,000 for this car, so it's not a massive investment. And then the engine blew. I thought, you know what, I'm not going to get involved in this. I put it on eBay and I got back just over half my investments.
A good warning from history. And what's gone better for you? What's the best deal you've ever had?
At the moment, about a year ago, I bought a 1989 Jaguar XJ40, which is a big, common saloon for the time. But it had great provenance. It's an unrestored car in great condition. And I bought it because I thought it wasn't quite cool, but I knew that it was going to become cool soon. The older versions have started to become a bit more valuable, and I thought I'd give it a try. And I spent £4,000 on this Jaguar, and I had it valued recently, and it's now worth £10,000. That's in less than a year. I've gone from a £4,000 car to a £10,000 car just because I predicted the market bang on, and I'm very proud of that. But here's a slight problem with the investment. I really like the car, and I don't want to sell it. so I'm keeping it for now.
Well, that's the problem with all of these so-called passion investments, isn't it? If you like it too much, you never make any money out of it, John.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing. You've got to enjoy it for it to be worth your while investing in this stuff. But then, if you want to make the money, you either have to sell it on, or I mean, alternatively, you can consider these things as a legacy. But then you just have to think of your kids selling it on, which is probably just as hurtful.
And Ashley, a legacy from this show might be people checking out your business. Where can people find you?
Absolutely, we can be found at palmdale.co.uk, PALMDALE, where we're always happy to talk about more modern cars, sourcing and helping people who are struggling to buy them.
And with that, we speed away from this 4th episode of Investments Unwrapped. My thanks once again to John and Ashley for joining me today. This series is brought to you by the Platinum Card from American Express and MoneyWeek. The Platinum Card from American Express allows you to save as you spend, earning you a membership rewards point for every £1 you spend on your card. Your points can be used to pay for almost any item on your card statement, and they never expire, so you can save them up and spend them when the time is right. What's more, the Platinum Card also offers over 30 travel and lifestyle benefits, including airport lounge access, worldwide travel insurance, as well as a 24/7 concierge service that can help you arrive in style or book that Mediterranean road trip. To find out more about what the Platinum Card has to offer, just search Amex Platinum. Annual fee £575, terms and conditions apply. If you prefer a card without any rewards, other features, or a card membership fee, an alternative is available: the Basic Card. The information spoken about in this podcast does not constitute personal advice to invest and is not a personal recommendation on the specific products mentioned. If you're not sure whether an investment of this type is right for you, please seek advice from suitable financial advisors who will be able to advise based on your personal circumstances. If you choose to invest, the value of your investment could be at risk and fall, so you could get back less than the amount you put in originally. Investing in classic cars is not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. On the next episode of Investments Unwrapped, we'll take the time to look at watches. Can you make money investing in timepieces? And to have that episode make its way to your wrist, if you have a smartwatch, do follow The Week Unwrapped via your podcast app of choice, and with that, you'll also get our main show delivered to your device each and every Friday. Thanks for listening. I've been Olly Mann, the producers Sophie King and Lauren Armstrong-Carter at Rethink Audio. Bye-bye.